Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on pioneering innovation. My name is Charles Fisher. I'm a lawyer at KHQ Lawyers. I run lots and lots of online training, believe it or not, given the technical kerfuffles I've had so far in this one, but usually they run very much smoother than this. I, in particular, specialize in food regulation, which is what we're here to talk about today. Uh, and in particular, I mean, first of all, hopefully everyone in this, all the guests in the webinar, all the attendees, hopefully you all are aware of who Val is. Otherwise, I'm going to give Veronica and Nick a chance to quickly introduce themselves and to pitch what their business does and what the product does. But I think it's really important to not understate the monumental achievement of Australia's first cell cultured or lab grown meat product gaining regulatory approval and being allowed to be sold in Australia. And Veronica and Nick, I'm going to probably ask you guys what you think of the follow-up, because I saw just last week there's been a second application for a lab grown product. I think it's duck. Anyway, it's been in the news a lot. It is probably one of my career highlights that I have worked with Val on this application. And I see it as a real case study, hence this webinar, for how to bring pure innovation to a marketplace. And food is obviously quite a prescriptively regulated category, but hopefully for people in the webinar or watching this at some point in the future, you'll see that it could apply to almost the lessons that we'll take from this can apply to almost any category of consumer good and the challenges that have been faced. So, deep breath. Veronica and Nick, please feel free to introduce yourselves and your role and pitch what Val does.
Sure, I can start. So I'm Veronica Volfneuk. Hi, everyone. I'm the Legal and Regulatory Counsel here at VOW. I advise the company across all legal areas, and I support the company's work with food regulators globally, assisting with things like regulatory submissions. Before joining VOW, I started off in private practice, and then I moved into an in-house legal role in the charity sector. And I've been at VOW for about 1.5 years now.
Nick, over to you.
It's my turn. Hey everyone. I'm Nick Connell. I'm the Regulatory Affairs Manager at VOW. And I guess my responsibilities within the business are management of our regulatory projects. So extending from things like this food safety approval that we're going to talk about through to input for our quality assurance programs, product development, marketing, and even some religious certifications I'm working on a little bit on the background about halal and how our products might fit into those sorts of frameworks. So before VOW, I spent my entire career in the medical device industry. I was an engineer by education and have worked across regulatory and quality roles in the medical device industry. Before transitioning over to novel foods.
Amazing. And I'm so excited to hear about your guys' backgrounds outside of this, because I think hopefully you'll bring some of two things. First of all, you'll bring your backgrounds to this food discussion, but hopefully you might also share how food is very different to other product categories from a regulatory perspective. But for everyone watching, Val's achievement has been in the news a lot, and I'm sure you've all heard specifically your Val's CEO, George, has been very active in the media and is a very exciting person to watch. I saw him at the Cell Ag conference this year talking purely on the engineering aspects of the achievement. But I want to just say what makes this webinar different to all the other media discussions of VOW is that we are purely going to address the journey of how to take something that has never been done before and make it legally allowed for people to put it in their mouths. So that's the challenge that you guys have faced over the years, and I presume and will continue to face with your new products and R&D. So let's start at the very beginning, because I'm fascinated why my bias is that Australia is a very small country in terms of population, not in terms of land mass, but we're a small market from a pure economic perspective. And even though we're a small market, partially because of we're an island nation and we've got very strict biosecurity laws, our food is very heavily regulated. We are probably one of the most prescriptively regulated jurisdictions in the entire world. We're up there with Canada, Europe, Japan. And so I am surprised that a company like Vow decided to headquarter in Australia when it could have chosen to start that journey anywhere in the world. So why Australia?
Yeah, so we actually lodged applications with the Singapore and the Australian regulators at roughly the same time, as they both seemed like really good prospects to start with. But I guess we're asking about Australia here. So basically, starting with Australia was just a natural starting point for Vow, as we're based here in Sydney, and our founder George Pepper is from Sydney. So for us, starting locally just had a number of advantages. It meant that, from our conception as a business 6 years ago, we had lots of opportunities to have really robust discussions with the federal regulator for FSANZ, as well as our local regulator, the New South Wales Food Authority. And yeah, as you say, Charles, there's obviously a lot of red tape in Australia, but luckily for us, FSANZ happens to be one of the few regulators around the world who are really proactively interested in getting cell cultured food products approved. And despite not having, at the time that we applied, the correct regulatory assessment frameworks, that we would need to be able to actually slot into the legislation, FSANZ were really cooperative in figuring out how cultured meat could fit in and, what legislative reform needed to be made to accommodate that. Another significant consideration was that FSANZ is a really well-respected regulator globally. So we thought that an Australian approval would be really valuable when it came to seeking approvals from other global regulators. When we made the choice to start in Australia, we were also always thinking about what other global market opportunities that might come with that, what doors the Australian approval might open, because we are obviously thinking about selling our products elsewhere. As you mentioned, one of the challenges in the Australian system is that there is that separation between all the regulatory bodies. So you've got the standard setting body, the manufacturing safety assessment, and then there's also the import-export side of things. Unlike the Singapore regulatory framework, which is quite a closed process, it's all up to the one regulator and they're primarily concerned with more of the safety technical piece. In Australia, it's a completely different ballgame. We needed approval from a number of regulators. And then on top of that, we also needed the public's buy-in via 2 rounds of public consultation. And then on top of that, we also needed buy-in from all the food ministers from each state to actually get to gazettal. So already it's much more of a balancing act. You need the approval from FSANZ. You also need the approval from DAF, the biosecurity regulator. And then finally, we needed the New South Wales Food Authority to come in and actually audit our factory, as that's like a capstone to the entire approval process. So there are benefits, there are also challenges, but it just made sense for us to start here.
There's so much to unpack in that answer. There's a couple of things I would love to dive into a bit more. What products, what jurisdictions have you found having this FSANZ approval has actually helped so far?
Well, we've only got our Singapore approval as well. And we are exploring other countries in the Asia Pacific region. I guess it hasn't been as smooth sailing as we were hoping in terms of the Australian approval actually unlocking other jurisdictions. But we still think that holistically having the FSANZ approval will help for our future applications.
And I was at the the AIFST, the Australian Institute of Food Science and Technology, their convention earlier this year, and I was on a panel with FSANZ, and they were spruiking and trumpeting the transparency of their approval process. Because for anyone in the room who doesn't know, the process that you guys underwent to gain approval is actually changing the law. Like you've applied to FSANZ to have the Food Standards Code changed to expressly allow your product. And so that process, like you've said, you've had to engage with the public and with the ministers through the stakeholder consultation process. So much of that process is open and transparent, whereas my understanding of a lot of other jurisdictions is you apply and then there's a black box for a long period of time, and then you either gain approval or you don't. Has there been, how has Val found the transparency of the FSANZ process?
Nick, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, happy to. Look, at a high level, can't really speak highly enough of the transparency we've sort of experienced. I mean, I think it goes both ways as well. I mean, for as long as I've been here, which is a little bit over 2 years, but I think for the 3 or 4 years preceding that as well, it seems to be a marker of Val that we're going beyond our sort of obligations for transparency. Wherever we can, we're giving more information than we need to, just to give, I guess, people, industry or regulators or customers or whoever it is, confidence in what is, conceptually quite a novel thing. And so I think, I don't know how explicitly that sort of transparency was recognized by FSANZ, for example, but it was certainly reciprocated. We were really lucky enough to have sort of like weekly or fortnightly check-in calls with the project manager and scientific assessors throughout the technical assessment portion. We were lucky enough that those calls extended even beyond that. So we would have frequent touch points with FSANZ in the lead up to the rounds of public consultation. They would keep us abreast of timelines, or if delays were encountered, or if a particular assessor had a particular question sort of even slightly outside the scope of whatever assessment report they were compiling. It extended to in-person visits. FSANZ reps came on site before, during, I think as well after the scientific assessment portion sort of wrapped up, to help answer some of the questions that were important to them, but also, I guess, to scratch their itch or their curiosity and really understand what we were doing. And benefit to us having them on side, but like we found a lot of what we're describing in our dossier and our technical documentation, it's just made so much more digestible when someone can walk through and see what a bioreactor actually is, or see what particular connections look like, or watch a process in action, or see the PPE that someone's wearing, for example. So, I think we went above and beyond our sort of transparency obligations. Yeah, at a high level, those were almost more than reciprocated by FSANZ throughout the approval process.
And were there any concerns at all? Like, I know sometimes people, in my experience, clients from other jurisdictions look at our processes and go, you're telling the government what now? Like, you're sharing trade secrets. Like, did Val ever feel at any point that there was any concern over whether those like proprietary information would ever come out to the public or compromise its processes?
I guess from my perspective, Veronica, maybe you have another one, but from my perspective, no. FSANZ in particular seemed quite conscious of the level of sort of confidential information that we were providing to them. They were proactive and reached out and checked multiple times, like, would we be happy with X or Y or Z if it was to be put in the sort of public facing dossier. They gave us an opportunity, maybe even 2 opportunities, to sort of review and redact the information we had provided. So it felt front of mind for FSANZ throughout the whole process. And I guess that sort of gave us confidence that it was, all being considered, everything necessary, I guess, to ensure the confidentiality of what we were providing them that was taking place. So certainly I didn't have any. I'm not sure if Veronica's legal eyes maybe saw differently.
I would echo that as well, Nick.
So Veronica, final question just on this first question, diving in. You mentioned all the other, like the New South Wales Food Authority and the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries and Forestry, I think it's currently named. How has Val found that in Australia this separation between the sort of the writing of the law, the approvals, and then separately the regulation of import and export, both of like your materials and then the export of your product, and then you mentioned the New South Wales Food Authority's actual like auditing of your facilities.
Yeah, so it's definitely a balancing act. The timing was definitely a challenge because we had, the launch date in mind, but we had to make sure that we had all our ducks in a row and the approvals from all of the regulators lining up, which was, a bit of a challenge to manage. I guess I'll start with DAF. The DAF approvals were really important for us because certain key components of our production process were originally imported into Australia with some restrictions on them. For example, that you can only use it for R&D. And I believe that's like a standard condition that would be in a lot of quick issue DAF permits. So before we could legally sell our products, we had to apply to DAF to have those conditions removed. Otherwise, that would block our ability to commercialize. As I said, the timing was a challenge because DAF didn't want to remove those conditions until the FSANZ approval was gazetted. So we had to just make sure that we were timing all of these things. And we did have to, talk to specific people at DAF to get this kind of escalated and speed things up. Luckily, we managed to get that all done, but definitely one approval was kind of contingent on the other. And then secondly, there's the New South Wales Food Authority, our home regulator. So the final step in the process was they had to come and they had to audit our factory. And thankfully, that was quite a straightforward process in the end, because before that final audit, they had actually already been on site half a dozen times. They knew the team, they'd come for workshops and had like lots of meetings. So they had a really strong understanding already of what we were doing. And we found them to be like a really efficient regulator to work with. They're super pragmatic and they're always willing to come on site and actually review the particulars of any changes that we're considering to our process. And they've always been really cooperative in figuring out like what level of notification needs to be given and how much they actually need to review things. They're the regulator that we anticipate that we'll be dealing with the most in the future as their approval is required before any changes can be made to the process.
Amazing. Thank you. Like, I still am amazed. I don't know what it looks like to have the like in the code, the regulation of how you guys are to make any cell cultured food, not just your product in particular. It's very open-ended. It's just like the ingoing materials must be safe. The production must be safe. How is the New South Wales Food Authority, and this may be, you guys can't talk to what it might be like to be in another Australian jurisdiction, but are there any concerns that you may have around how they're checking safety? Like what kind of, how have they gone about creating a food safety plan with you guys for a completely new technology?
And I can try to answer this one. I guess I'll just preface everything I'm about to say with continuation of what I was just talking about, is that transparency seems to be the key amongst all of this sort of stuff. I think New South Wales Food Authority have been genuinely one of the best regulators we've dealt with. I mean, obviously we've dealt with a couple in Australia now, but around the world too. They're just unbelievably pragmatic, pro-business. The people we're dealing with are technically competent. I think they're both sort of have PhDs in food science and safety. So there's a level of trust that's going both ways. I guess we don't have a great deal of visibility over the exact processes they're following to assess safety, but the way we're looking at it is we're basically treating sort of, post this initial approval, any sort of change we want to make, or, anything that even differs slightly from what we would have submitted to FSANZ. Almost the first step of any process like that is getting on the phone with our contacts at New South Wales Food Authority and talking all of these through. I think, even before we got approval, we recognize good hallmark of like quite a mature regulated environment is that there's sort of adequate transparency in both the pre and post market phase. And so a manufacturer can have confidence that if they make a change like this, it will have that regulatory impact and really start to plan their business out that way. So we actually put together quite a lengthy plan or proposal for what that would look like. This is an area that's bringing sort of experience from the medical device industry, and so adopting a similar model. And so with that proposal, we shared it with FSANZ and Singapore and New South Wales Food Authority. I mean, continuing to share it everywhere, but I guess they're the most important ones for now. I think New South Wales Food Authority agreed to basically everything we said in principle, but basically just made the proposal that, you guys are still so new, we're new to this too. How about just for the next 12, 18 months or so, for every change, regardless of like how significant you classify it is according to this, proposed classification frame, just bring it with us and discuss it. And, I think in any other industry, you might be quite wary of that as a manufacturer. I think it's easy to assume that regulators are going to take the most conservative approach, and, even a slight change or to a supplier of a minor input, it means you have to wait 6 months before you can make the change. But that hasn't been the case at all. We still prepare submit, like after we talk it through with them, we will still prepare a submission. There's a risk assessment, there's a testing plan and testing summary, and we provide them all of the evidence of that testing. But they just sort of, I guess, review it maybe through a process they've developed, but either way, it's been a very like sort of conversational, transparent process. A lot of the review or assessment that they appear to have done has happened in calls or in-person meetings, for example. And we've been through this half a dozen times probably since the FSANZ approval came through. And it's, I mean, from our perspective, it's working really well. And everything that they've told us is that they're very pro-us, pro-business in general. And as long as they have confidence that we're sort of mitigating risks according to, our food safety program, which they've seen and they're really confident in, they'll have confidence in us sort of going as well.
So we've got our first question from our attendees. Jennifer Thompson is very kindly asked in the Q&A box. So for anyone else who's looking for it, in my controls, it's under the 3 dots more controls. But if you find the Q&A controls, please feel free to lodge questions. But Jennifer has asked, what future approvals are you anticipating needing from the New South Wales Food Authority? And it sounds like it's sort of an ongoing, there's not an approval per se, but more of just an ongoing two-way communication.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like our approvals are often an email saying, looks good, no worries, sort of thing. So it's not necessarily as formal a process. The changes, I guess, we're expecting to get approval for in that sense, though, are everything, I guess, to do with continuous improvement activities for us. We might maybe take a step back. There are changes which are going to impact the details of our approval that appear in the Food Standards Code. If we're changing cell line ID, like identifier, things like bigger changes that are in the code, we know that it's more appropriate that we're dealing with FSANZ for that type of change. But basically for everything else, we've sort of had agreement with FSANZ and New South Wales Food Authority that it's the enforcement agency's responsibility to assess those. So some of the things we've had approval for and will probably continue to seek, it's like changes to major process steps or changes to inputs or those sorts of things, which aren't, I guess, invalidating or contradicting anything that's been included in the code, but which should probably have a regulator's view on, I guess, before they're enacted. Or if this was any other country, a regulator sort of probably would be reviewing those changes before it's implemented on the factory floor.
So, I mean, so far, if anyone's looking to bring a completely new technology into the Australian market, the key takeaway that I'm getting so far from you both is communication with regulators is only beneficial rather than trying to withhold information or be careful or adversarial in any way. It sounds like VAO has developed really great two-way relationships with both Fazans and the New South Wales Food Authority. Now, I can't remember I mean, I could look it up, and I probably should have looked it up, but the date of Val's first application was years ago. I think, was it during COVID pandemic?
January 2023.
Okay. And the Fazans Act states that there is a fixed term as to how long it can possibly take them to approve it's in the law that they can only take so long to approve a novel food. And yet it felt like from the outside that Fazan's clock kept getting stopped. They're like, oh, we're only taking this long, but we're handing it back to you guys. How did it feel like that was appropriate? Did it feel frustrating? Like, how could you schedule in and control for the amount of time that it would take from your first application through to approval?
Yeah, look, from a technical sense, in terms of the clock stopping because of time needed to respond to technical questions, I think this is roughly the same as our experience in Singapore. Our Singaporean might have actually been slightly longer too. They required us to make an actual technical change to our product and change in input. Fazans didn't share that same concern. And so, you know, the clock wasn't necessarily stopped. They did pause to accept the new data we were generating from Singapore, but it's not due to a concern that they'd raised. The key clock stop was that sort of portion between the two rounds of public consultation. I think anybody that's been through it before, they could probably typically expect in the range of 6 to 8 weeks. But for us, it was like a 9 or 10 month process, I think. And so that's really, I think, where this all sort of blew out. It's, you know, unfortunate for us as first movers, I think, but it's obviously changes that are going to benefit the industry as a whole. So it's not like we're over here devastated by what took place. Certainly, like, I don't mean to minimize the frustrations we had internally, as, you know, the clock was on hold sort of seemingly indefinitely. But I think where we are now is a really healthy appreciation for the time that Fazans did take to make sure that, you know, every time someone else submits, even if it's us, they're not having to constantly try and nip and tuck and figure out where these novel products can maybe fit or squeeze into the existing regulations. So, you know, this whole process of creating new regulations, I think, has been, yeah, in hindsight, a really positive experience for us.
I mean, the reason why I'm digging in a little bit is my experience is that I have a lot of clients with real incredible innovations, be it in food or cosmetic or therapeutic goods space or medical devices space, and they have funding to develop the product. And so they've developed the product and they're all excited. And it's only when the product has been developed and you have that data that you're talking about, Nick, and you can be confident of the safety that you can even really start the approval process. And so you are budgeting runway or getting funds without any revenue to accommodate this period of time to get access. And so it's that big gap that I really hope anyone in the watching this is kind of aware of. And yes, Val has very kindly shortened that gap for all future cultivated food products. But you guys got approval in Singapore while you were seeking approval here in Australia. Were there any issues in making a product and exporting it from Australia while you didn't have approval to sell it in Australia?
There were some temporary problems, I guess, or temporary issues that seemed to be problems that ended up resolving themselves with time. Like Veronica mentioned, we actually submitted in both regions roughly the identical moment. I'm not sure if it was down like the same day or minute or hour, but it was really close. Approval in Singapore came through in March of 2024. So it was about a 14-month approval process there, as opposed to the 30 odd months that it took here. So there was obviously a pretty significant gap where we would be able to start selling, making money, hopefully reduce our reliance on that runway that you mentioned, Charles. But around that time of the initial approval in both markets, I think, again, not to harp on about transparency too much, but I think we did a really good job of connecting those two regulators. We had multiple, I mean, this is before my time, but we had lots of workshops and meetings and had both regulators on site at the same time, just to make sure we were addressing both regions' sort of requirements as much as we could. But something that became apparent relatively soon after submitting was that eventually, to get our products into Singapore, the SFA had mentioned that we were going to need a manufacturing license from a competent authority in our own country. So in that case, it'd be New South Wales Food Authority. But then speaking with them, they said they weren't able to issue a license because they didn't yet view us as a food company because we weren't selling food yet. And so we had this kind of like strange circular dependency that was just not helpful to anyone. I think we got our HACCP system certified maybe externally certified a couple of months, I think, after that initial approval. And then I think once we had that certificate and we, both SFA had confidence that our HACCP program had sort of adequately identified all the novel risks relevant to our process, I believe it was at that point that sort of requirement to have a license from New South Wales Food Authority diminished. And then so in terms of getting products into the country, into Singapore, there were no hurdles. It was an incredibly smooth process and continues to be. I guess the requirements even for getting products into Singapore are included in our approval letter that the SFA issued. So there's just a whole bunch of documentation and sort of testing that we need to have performed and provide, and our products have basically never been held up or rejected. I guess on the flip side, the actual requirement to get products out of the country was another issue, and similarly, transparency won the day there. Basically, there was some really early engagement with DAF to get as official as an email can be, an official ruling that whether or not we'd be a prescribed or a non-prescribed good. So they confirmed really early on they'd consider us non-prescribed, so they weren't seeing any sort of export controls on us. And realistically, quite a smooth end-to-end process of getting products out of the country and into Singapore, even though we're still ostensibly a long way off an approval here.
I highlight that just for the people in the room to go, oh, while this regulatory journey was really long, from having product ready to go to market to then being approved in Australia, you were able to gain approval in another market and gain export approval from Australia and get the product, exporting and selling, so that the revenue is not necessarily dependent on one jurisdiction. I was just wanting to call that out as a pretty impressive piece of learning from you guys. But Veronica, I'd love to hear from you on a legal perspective. The products obviously only gained approval earlier this year. You're developing new products. How do you do consumer testing legally on a product that is yet to have approval?
Yeah, so that grey zone is really what makes this job really interesting, I guess, from a legal for a dull day. But luckily, we've been really fortunate to have your support, Charles, and the team at KHQ. I think that expertise in managing that grey zone has been instrumental, and we couldn't do it without you. So thank you for that. I guess I'll start by saying that while our end product is definitely novel, and as you say, it was unapproved for a long time, the steps and the manufacturing process that we employ are just not novel at all. So those processes have been used in adjacent food industries for a really long time. And internally, we have a really robust pool of knowledge around food safety and quality control that can be easily applied even before the development of mandated requirements for our industry specifically. So yeah, since receiving our FSANZ approval, we haven't really changed how we produce our food or much at all in that respect. And even before we had the green light from FSANZ to sell our cultured quail, as Nick said, we'd already received HACCP certifications for our food safety program, and we were already following a lot of internationally recognised standards for the production of cell cultured food. So we could be really confident internally that while it's unapproved by FSANZ, we're doing everything we can from a food safety and compliance perspective. But yeah, on the consumer testing front, all of our consumer testing, we just made sure that that was done on premises in a very controlled setting. We always had the appropriate staff on hand. Everyone who tasted our product was provided with a lot of information about exactly where it was up to in the FSANZ approval process. So no one tasting it thought it was an approved good. Like, everyone understood that it was for R&D. Everyone was provided with a list of ingredients and any allergens that could be in it. So again, on the transparency piece, it's like always making sure that, as well as with the regulator, with the consumer, we're being super transparent, or I guess the taster before they're a consumer legally. And that approach has really served us well in managing that grey zone before the product is actually approved for sale.
Mm. I can't wait to see the products that you guys are working on next. Now, we've already talked a bit about the big timing between the two rounds of stakeholder consultation in the approval process. And we're all familiar with the shorthand CFS, which was call for submissions. But as part of that FSANZ call for submissions, they would issue a draft amendment to the code for everyone to comment on. Those two draft amendments to the Food Standards Code, from the first call for submissions to the second call for submissions, were wildly different. I've been practicing in this area for almost 20 years, and I've never seen such a shift. Maybe the health claim standard was the only other one that shifted so much between calls for submission. What was Val's reaction to that second call for submission draft being so wildly different from the first one?
Yeah, I think it follows on what I said before. Is like honestly frustrating in the moment, but very quickly turned into quite a positive. Like, it just so happened, like at the exact time they told us they were shifting their sort of approach to actually drafting all of these new standards, we'd already begun. I mean, because we're in this 9 to 10 month period, and we didn't really have a great deal of visibility of what was going on. We'd actually begin drafting our own proposal for what it might look like, with a view to being like, hey, once you approve this could be a good idea for you in the future. And we were probably days away from sending them through our own drafts to be like, hey, have you considered this? So it was just funny timing that they reached out to say, hey, look, we've completely changed our approach. And like, again, frustrating to be like, oh, it's good to know that 9 months into the process, but like really quickly became quite a good a positive. I don't know. It's for us, I guess, quite a good signal that FSANZ themselves have confidence in our industry. Like, if they didn't, it would be a huge amount of effort to be going through such significant sort of changes to the code. And then I guess from the industry side, or us as VAL or all future manufacturers, I think it's also a really big positive too, because it is obviously giving way clearer guidance to prospective manufacturers about how their products are going to be regulated, and what they will and won't be able to do once they're on market. And yeah, I guess as well, hinting at what I said about the post-market stuff before, it's just setting I guess, clearer set of expectations about what might trigger re-engagement with FSANZ versus a state competent authority, for example. So yeah, I guess the top line is frustration in the moment, but that very, very quickly turned to a recognition that this was a massive positive for the industry.
Just to address Rebecca's question, do you think our current regulators are ready for the massive shift to our food system from food innovation? I'm not a scientist, I'm only a lawyer, and I can't speak to all aspects of food innovation, but I think the step that was taken between the first call for submissions and the second one, the first one, it was treating Val's product like a novel food and just going to approve Val's one ingredient as a novel food. And what has ended up gaining approval is a whole application pathway and category of cell cultured foods. It's not limited to Val's ingredient, and is in fact created a pathway and definition and processing standards across not all cell cultured foods, because they still have specifically called out certain categories of products that are cell cultured. But I guess that there is some future work for people in different categories of cell cultured foods to make applications to change the law. But I think it was a real step to future proofing the regulations. And Nick, like you said, the first call for submissions was basically saying if you're going to change the size of the bioreactor, it will require a whole amendment to the code, like another 15-month process or something like that. And now they've handed that over to this two-way conversation that you're having with the New South Wales Food Authority that can get approved via email. So, Rebecca, and I don't want to speak for Nick and Veronica here, but I think if this is an example of anything, it is an example of regulators actually being adaptable and trying to amend the system to be ready for innovation. It is still quietly limited. But Veronica, I'm going to jump to perhaps a controversial question, given Australia is famous for its agricultural produce, including meat products. Is VOW's product meat? And I'm for anyone listening to this, it's not a podcast, you can see me. I'm putting quotation marks in because I'm specifically talking about the legal definitions of meat are reflective of how we've always produced food, and they sometimes involve the flesh of an animal or the substances taken from the carcass of a dead animal or something like that, which VOW's products clearly is not. So how do you feel about how VOW's products, and I guess all cell-grown meat, sits within the existing regulatory framework of meat?
Yeah, so the is it meat question seems to be the million-dollar question, and there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I guess if you're thinking about it conceptually or from more of a legal lens, conceptually, yes, it is real meat. It's just made very differently to traditional or farmed meat. We always like to remind people that VOW is in fact a company full of meat eaters. So we're not here trying to replace chicken, beef, lamb. What we're doing is offering meat eaters a whole new experience, and in fact a food that can actually complement the traditional meat on someone's plate really deliciously. So that's the conceptual piece. I guess in terms of how it's regulated, that is quite different to traditional meat, and we think it does make sense for it to be regulated quite differently. If you just start with the definition, as you said, Charles, in the food code, meat refers to an animal carcass and the way it's slaughtered. So obviously that just doesn't apply to our products. That's not how our products are made. I guess for anyone who's uninitiated, our products are made by isolating the cell line of an animal and then growing or culturing that cell in a nutrient-rich broth. So there's no animal slaughtering, there's no carcasses. So cultured meat and conventional meat are already coming from very different production systems, and so they naturally have very different risk profiles. And I guess if you take the rules that apply in an abattoir and then try to apply them to our spick and span factory full of bioreactors, it just doesn't really make any sense. The main hazards and controls in traditional meat production, things like slaughter and contamination risks and dealing with blood and tissue, things like that, that's quite distinct from the risks that we're managing in our facility in the cell culturing process. And that's more around, making sure that we're complying with our HACCP certification and the contamination on our factory floor and all of those sort of risks that are more to do with, I guess, cleanliness. For aspects like food safety and quality management, it definitely makes sense that the regulatory approach would differ because the risks that are being controlled for are just so different. When it comes to areas like consumer perception and nutrition labeling or permitted additives, things like that, those frameworks are really about the end product, not how it was produced. So in those cases, it might not make sense to create an entirely separate regulatory system for cultured food products. But essentially, we think the goal shouldn't be to try and mirror or duplicate all existing meat regulations, but to apply them to apply the right level of distinction depending on what that regulation is trying to achieve, and whether that regulation is about risk management in the production process, or whether it's about ensuring transparency for the consumer who's buying the end product and making sure they know what they're buying. What we do want to avoid is there being like a million more requirements on us just because we're new and using perhaps an unfamiliar production process. So for us, the goal is just to find a place where the level of regulation is reasonable and relevant to our safety processes, but also not overdoing it, because at the end of the day, we are a food product, and so we should be regulated like a food product. But yeah, that being said, we understand we're obviously being held to a different standard because of how new this method of food production is. But internally, we're really confident that we've had to demonstrate so much from a safety perspective, like 2 years of rigorous safety testing and requirements from numerous regulators. So we can be truly certain that our food has been scrutinized far more thoroughly than any of the other foods that we're consuming on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I mean, at the CellAg conference that George spoke at recently, there were members of DAF there who were talking about the import requirements, and it's still like, DAF is trying to protect Australia from things like foot and mouth disease and BSE and all these other risks that importing a cell line just is not going to pose that risk. And so I think there is still learning to be done about how the making of cell cultured meat should be regulated and conceived of differently. But from the end consumer perspective, I'm just terrified that at some point someone's going to demand that there be a complete sort of bifurcated regulation of cell-grown meat versus traditionally grown and slaughtered meat, where we're going to need two different definitions of a meat pie that both say they have to contain 25% meat, or two different definitions of salami or what have you. But I'm conscious that we're into the final 10 minutes. So I'm going to try and both ask some final questions of you guys, but also try and incorporate some of the questions we're getting through the Q&A. And this is a chance for attendees to throw some final questions into the Q&A. Kim Tanay, who is heavily involved in CellAg Australia, has stated that there is future regulatory progression needed. And I did allude to, and I didn't want to specify, but Kim has kindly done it for me, that the current standard for cell cultured foods is limited to animal cells and does not extend to plant cells. So anyone who's looking to use the same technology is still going to need a fairly substantial change to the Food Standards Code. So the FSANZ, while it is opening itself up, has also set some guardrails that may need to be broken down at a certain point. And all of this is going, comes to the question of why should we be growing meat in bioreactors as opposed to in farms? And I think this goes to Giorgio's question. From a technical point of view, how far is scalability for cultivated meat? So is one of the answers to this question as to why do we need cell cultured meat? And I think this is probably going to go more to you, Nick, with your engineering background, but how is there an economic argument to be made for cell cultured meat as against traditionally farmed meat?
We're honestly getting closer and closer every day. I think in the next day or two, we're starting another manufacturing seed train run with a goal of, the cost of goods for the, per kilogram, the cells harvested from that run being less than $50 a kilo. And that is, very nearly approaching what you'd expect to pay for some other conventional cuts of meat you'd see on the supermarket shelves. When I joined about 2 years ago, we had metric dashboards up all around the office, all around the factory. And I think at that time, the COGS per run that was being displayed was in the order of $600 or $700 a kilo. So, in 2 years, we've come down astronomically, and we're at a place where very soon we're going to be able to reliably compete on that sort of economic space. it's a really good result, but it's not easy. Like, it hasn't been an easy journey to get to this point, and I wouldn't want to undersell everything that's gone into doing it, gone into achieving it. This has come with a huge amount of sort of technological innovation. We've designed bioreactors from scratch and built them with our partners to make them unique. They have minimal connections, minimal opportunities for contaminations, for example, because literally every part of our process or our rate of contaminations, everything factors into that sort of economic argument. And yeah, there's been a huge amount of work to get to that point. We are, I think, far and away the largest, biggest producer of cultured meat in the world. We're routinely harvesting out of our 20,000 litre, harvesting close to a ton of cells out of our 20,000 litre reactor. And so, yeah, the scalability question has been partially answered by what we're doing. There's obviously still a way to go, and there is still a path to bringing that unit cost down even further.
Awesome. So I've got one question from Kim, or rather a sharing. I'm not sure if anyone can see this, but Cell Ag Australia has released a white paper on from the conference earlier this year, and Kim has provided a link to it. And I've read it, and it's a really good paper. But I want to wrap up with Rebecca asked, what are the learnings from this process? And I want to leave not just with the learnings that you guys have gone through, but also people might from the outside go, oh, you guys applied for approval, you got approval, that's the regulatory job done, right? So I'd like to end with what other regulatory work is still to be done despite having approval to sell your product in Australia? And then, yeah, summarize with your learnings from the past couple of years of working with Australia's or the world's largest cell-grown meat manufacturer.
Yeah, I mean, the work is never done. I guess our immediate radar is to rinse and repeat exactly this experience with as many countries that will sort of accept these sort of submissions. So, within the next couple of months, we hope to have equivalent submissions accepted by the US, in the EU, the UK, Canada too. So we'll be starting this sort of regulatory journey all over again in that sense, and hopefully trying to apply some of what we've learned and what made our journeys smoother here and in Singapore to all of those extra countries. There's a sense of market making too, just in the sense of helping to contribute, flesh out regulatory environments here and abroad. So, I mean, Kim will know, Val's been part of Cell Ag Australia for a long time, same with the Alternative Proteins Council. Will continue to engage there and see if any of our learnings can help apply with the advocacy they're doing. We're a part of the UK Sandbox workshop being run by Food Standards Authority over there. So again, we'll be trying to influence the development of the regulatory environment there based on our experiences here. On a sort of separate note, I think as well, practically speaking, we're going to have to expand what we're doing in our operations and our offerings if we're going to survive in the long run, because I guess at the moment we're targeting sort of high-end dining, and that is inherently going to be a limit or a ceiling on the amount of volume we can get out. So we're going to have to work to figure out, I guess, from a very legal and regulatory sense, where these new offerings can fit into existing regulatory frameworks, or where there is going to be additional work to sort of push the boundaries to fit us in. Do our DAF permits, import permits, allow what we're doing or producing or the derivatives of our process to be used in pet food, for example? Or do we need to re-engage New South Wales Food Authority when we launch fully in the retail space? Or what if we have a product that's, part raw meat, part cells? Do we have to get some other type of license? So as we expand our operations, there's going to be a great deal more work to figure out exactly what regulations we're pushing up against and how we might need to work to, again, I guess, throw our elbows around a little bit and make sure there's room for us.
And Veronica, what learnings have you taken from coming from like charity or other legal uh, systems or regulatory regimes into the future of food?
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep it brief. But I guess for any of the lawyers in the room that are really thinking about like how do you wade through the grey zone, I think it all comes back to what we've been saying this whole time. And it's just about the transparency and there always being an answer, even when perhaps there's no answer that exists already in the law. It's really about engaging those regulators and just asking the questions and starting that conversation. I think that's been the biggest learning from me coming from, the charity sector where it's highly regulated and the rules have already been written and you just follow them. This is a completely different experience where we were sort of helping the regulators write the law with us. So yeah, just that transparency and that communication has been, I think, a key learning for me.
Thank you so much for ending this on a beautiful note. And as Jennifer Thompson has observed, Val's expertise is contributing to international codex regulatory development. So just, yeah, the first key learning that I took from it seems to be the main one ongoing is that if you're looking to bring a completely new technology to a market that has not regulated it before, communication and openness and transparency seems to have been of benefit to Val and to, by extension, the work that Val has done to the rest of I think the food industry at large, like I'm going to say that, but particularly to the cultured meat industry. Thank you so much, Veronica and Nick, for making time, for your guys' openness and sharing in both the joys and frustrations of the journey that you guys have been on and where you're heading. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks
Thank you.
for your help, Charles, as well.
Yeah.
No worries. All right. Thank you to all attendees who asked questions. Please feel free to reach out to KHQ with any questions. And if you have them on Veronica and Nick, you can find them on LinkedIn and harangue them there. I'm going to end the webinar now. But yes, thank you so much. Amazing what you guys are doing. Please keep doing it.
Do our best. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.